All right, I'm excited about our next session. We're going to look at a couple mega trends that affects pretty much every company and I think every communicator right now, and that's the rise of the importance of corporate social responsibility as it relates to brand experience, and also the rise and influence of the millennial generation and their importance as consumers, as employees, as leaders. So I'm going to welcome up here Evan Shapiro, who's president of Pivot. And Pivot is Participant Media's new TV station. It's launched in 2012, and Evan is in charge of the television programming that really follows Participant Media's model of commercial and socially relevant programming. And welcome, Evan.
Thank you.
So we were talking beforehand, and Evan told me that when you're in the television business, showing up at an event, you must have a sizzle reel. He says there's two things you show up in, pants and with a sizzle reel. So we thank him for arriving with both. So please look at the screens, and we'll have a short sizzle reel to educate you about Pivot, because it is a pretty new station.
Right, check, ladies and gents, we want to thank you all for coming out this evening, because we are Freestyle Love Supreme. It's really different.
Hi, I'm Josh Thomas.
I look like a 50-year-old baby.
The tables have turned in America. It's awesome and it's weird, and I really hope people get it.
We're delivering the news, but I feel like we're having a conversation every night on the show.
It's the best experience of my life.
I track down the bad guy. You make the bust.
I'm a vampire slayer.
Really?
Is this on? What's this red light? Wait.
Yeah. 10 years in a row, we have only grown. We operate in 23 countries. Everything we did, we invented. How do we eliminate the concept of waste?
Fairfax is an incubator for young talent.
In my life, I know that I'm supposed to affect, like, the world.
Welcome to the world of dark rye. It's about people who make the world a more interesting, beautiful place to live in.
Voulez-vous coucher avec moi à Paris?
All right. I showed my age because they call it a television station. What is that?
It's a network, yes.
Yeah, it's a network. Yeah, tell me, what exactly is your description of Pivot?
Sure. A couple things. First of all, we actually launched about 8 months ago, so 2013, August 1st. And the idea here is Participant Media was founded by Gibbs Soell, who is the first employee of eBay, made a few $1 billion doing that with Pierre Midyar, and at the age of like 36, decided to take that money and dedicate it to making the world a better place. He was one of the first 4 signatories of the Giving Pledge, and really is set on giving the vast majority of his money away to help make the world more sustainable, more peaceful, better place for the future. One of the ways he chose to do that was founding Participant Media about 10 years ago, which is dedicated to his idea that a story well told can help change the world. Our mission is entertainment that inspires social change. And so 10 years, about 55 films, 36 Academy Award nominations, The Cove, Waiting for Superman, Good Night and Good Luck, Syriana, An Inconvenient Truth, Food Inc., Lincoln, the Best Exotic Marigold Hotel, each one with a social action campaign online that helps create change. Pivot was founded with the same concept, entertainment that inspires change, but dedicated to changing the future by talking to the future. So we're a network, online, on air, 45 million homes via traditional pay TV. We have a tremendous reach through our website, takepart.com, but it's dedicated to Generation Y. And this is a generation that, bucking conventional wisdom, which seems to think that they're this myopic, navel-gazing, narcissistic, entitled bunch of slackers, Really, we've seen research that is the exact opposite. I call them the new greatest generation. And so we create programming dedicated to them and their lifestyles that's meant to spark conversation and inspire them to do what they already naturally want to do, which is change the world, which my generation and those before it have spent the last 50 years destroying.
Right, and you know, the millennial generation, as I mentioned in the intro, you know, it's so important. We are going to be facing a hiring problem. You know, the recession kind of hid one of the biggest challenges that companies are facing, which is turnover of the workforce. And so from an HR standpoint, we're trying to reach out to them. But then also, obviously, it's a gigantic consumer market.
It's going to be the #1 consumer market for the next quarter century. It's going to be 75% of the workforce in the next 5 to 10 years. And unless you understand how to both speak to this generation as opposed to down to this generation, and unless you know how to manage this generation and harness the energy and the power that they encompass, you will fail. There is no way to be successful on a moving forward basis unless you deal, I mean, and what's strange is that this is obvious when you talk about boomers, right? This generation, Generation Y, is larger than the boomer generation. It's 80 million versus 76 million. So the fact that you have it's 80 million people between the ages of 15 and 34 and that we don't consider them the most important generation on earth is folly.
Right, and I think from a communication standpoint, when we spoke, you mentioned they're digital natives. You know, and again, you know, they see the world of communications much more differently than I do. And you have some interesting programming in partnership with sponsors, and Dark Rye was in the sizzle reel, and that's sponsored by Whole Foods. And can you talk a little bit about, you know, how did that come about, and why Whole Foods is looking at this original programming on your network?
Well, I think that first of all, television, with all due respect to the two panelists who came before this, television is the most powerful media on earth. When you look at what's talked about online, a good deal of it is television. Television is the most liked, the most tweeted, the most talked about media on the face of the earth. So, and by the way, when you talk to any advertiser, it's also the most effective way to advertise because of the emotional connection that's made between a storyteller and their audience. So when you look at a brand like Dark Rye, or we did a really major program with Monster.com last year, the ability to use television effectively to tell your story is a great way to create an emotional connection between you and the target audience that you're trying to reach. The major issue with television over the last 25 years is that it's gone from a mass media to a niche media. You know, with all due respect to shows like The Walking Dead and The Voice, the vast majority of television, successful television, is really niche-oriented. Who here watches Mad Men? Okay? So you're about 1% of everybody who watches Mad Men, meaning it's a small audience on a relative basis compared to a lot of other things out there, yet it's one of the most powerful pieces of media the last 10 years. It's affected fashion, it's affected conversation, it's one of the most award-winning pieces of content out there. Anybody here watch Portlandia? So that and this is the entire audience of Portlandia. So I actually executive produced that show, also very influential, but again, very niche-oriented. There are a bunch of shows on television that would have been canceled a number of years ago. The great thing about it, though, is that from an advertising standpoint and a messaging standpoint, you can now use television to reach a very specific audience. You know, you look at Stephen Colbert is now going to become a mass media player, but his audience, the power of him is you know, he has 1 million viewers a night. Jimmy Fallon is wildly successful at 3.3 million viewers. So, you know, you can speak specifically to an audience now using television in a way that you could not in 1972 when 67 million people a week watched All in the Family every week, all at the same time. That was great and really powerful, but you had to cater a message to everyone, which is very difficult to do. So Dark Rye wanted to reach a very specific audience, which is upscale, smart, influential people between the ages of 18 and 34. And so we spoke to them and we created a 22 episode series, 10 o'clock on Wednesdays on Pivot, check your local listings. And we were able to create these characters that you saw on the show that really speak to the audience. In Monster, we created a 9-part series about how to get a better job. And right now in America, a story about how to get a better job for this generation is really, really important. And we did a piece of research with RentTrack to chart the ROI. And while we are not the largest audience that you're gonna reach on any given basis, but that program, which lasted 9 weeks and had components online, on air, in show, and run of network, was about 9 times more effective than a traditional 30-second spot. It was the most successful product integration in the talk genre, and this is according to a third-party RentTrack ITVX, all due respect to Nielsen. That is where you are that's how you're going to be measured. It's not necessarily pure reach anymore. It's about engagement. It's about brand lift. It's about intent to use. If you can move that, then you will be deemed successful. Television is the most powerful way to do it, and it will continue to be that way because of the emotion that's involved in storytelling.
But television is really different because it's multiple platform. As you spoke, I mean, you can't ignore the extension of that, and even with your own programming, take part is such an important part of your program. And also the approach, what's kind of funny is, I guess, as humans, we like to take the unfamiliar and make it familiar. I look at the Dark Rye as like the Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, where you're associating your brand with interesting programming that's relevant to the audience you're trying to reach, that's really not TV advertising, which was more the traditional power of TV, right? Just the eyeballs. And can you talk a little bit about how you integrate multiple platforms, and also just that power for brands to connect themselves with interesting content, not necessarily promotional content?
The best thing, I mean, I don't necessarily think that it has to be non-promotional in order to be effective. Jimmy was talking about the Volvo ad with Van Damme. That was a really great ad, and it was compelling content. No one mistook it for something other than a commercial. You look at the Cheerios commercial that came out last year that featured a biracial couple, which somehow created a controversy, surprisingly. The earned media that it was able to produce was spectacular because it was good. The Doritos commercials, which are the least expensive and most effective ads every year inside the Super Bowl, they're just good. It doesn't matter that they're promoting something. The Kindle Paperwhite commercial that featured a kind of implicit endorsement for gay marriage. Also, millions and millions of additional views online. So I think that good content will always out, whether it's an ad or a show. That said, we have a show that we're about to announce next week, which I won't tell you about because I'm not allowed, but it's a scripted drama. And we're looking for the right partner to present it with limited commercial interruption. If a client can come along or a brand can come along and present a show to an audience, having done that is actually an agreement between the brand and the audience that, hey, we understand cool shit and we're giving it to you without getting in your way. And the audience then likes that. There's a brand lift just by getting the audience. Arby's hat tweet from the Grammys. That says to the audience, I get you. I understand where you're coming from. Pharrell Williams is cool, and that's a funny looking hat. And that's a really nice relationship builder between an audience, between a brand and an audience. So that's what we try to do when we do branded content. We actually try to do really good storytelling that gives the brand credit. Grey Goose and Iconoclast, which is a show that I worked on for a number of years. There's a really good example of that. For Hyundai, there was a piece in the sizzle reel there for a show called Hit Record, which is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's show that he does for us. And we went after Joe really hard because we thought he was a really good brand. He was a really good face for us. He embodies this generation in a nutshell. And what we did for Hyundai was we created a series inside that series. And we went to millennials, students. We have a relationship with an organization called Students of the World, which is a nonprofit organization run by Courtney Spence that teaches college students how to make professional grade film for a cause. And we've used them to set up mini versions of participant media on 15 college campuses across the country. So we have 15 mini film studios on college campuses all across the country. And when a brand like Hyundai comes in, or a brand like Starbucks comes in, we do an RFP to all our mini studios. And then we get pitches, and then we and the client decide together which pitch we like. The students from Berkeley pitched a film made at the 16th Street Station, which is a landmark building in Oakland. And we made a series that aired inside Hit Record each week for 4 weeks for Hyundai, by students. For millennials, by millennials. Really good content brought to you by a brand. The brand was in there. There was no mistaking it that it wasn't a commercial. But at the same time, because it was good and it was for the audience by the same generation, it really resonated.
Yeah, you get the entertainment value, and like you were saying, you know, those commercials really say, "We get you. This is interesting to you." The last question before I go to the audience is just being part of participant. You mentioned some of the documentaries in particular, in addition to the feature films that they produce. You know, I can imagine. You know, there's times when those documentaries, in particular like Food Inc., where they challenge an entire industry, and in some cases a specific company. And these very well could be the industries and companies that you need to target to hit what you call the double bottom line, which is the commercial success along with the social impact. You can talk about, you know, kind of threading that needle.
Yeah, so we are a double bottom line company, commercially high quality content that is successful based on market reaction and social change. That's unusual. We are a category creator in the media space with regards to that. On a moving forward basis, that will not be unusual. 90% of the millennial generation is actively involved in at least one cause, okay? 78% is actively engaged in at least 4 causes. 28% are actively engaged in 10 causes or more. So this is table stakes on a moving forward basis. And if you're a company whose entire purpose is to make money by selling things that are bad for the world, it's not going to be successful long term. It doesn't mean that you can't make money, and it doesn't mean that your product has to be always good for the world, but you have to leave the world at least in not a worse place for having done your business. This is table stakes. If you're Clorox and you give away bleach to help after disaster relief, you're going to have to talk about that intelligently as opposed to just saying, well, bleach is a good product, you should buy it. If you're McDonald's or you're Coke or you're any of these other brands on a moving forward basis, you're going to have to think about how your product affects the world because this generation is going to hold you to task for it. And so you thread the needle by speaking truth to power, by walking into an advertiser and saying, look, we understand that not everything you do is great for the planet, but what are you doing to counterbalance that? And what do you do that actually does leave the world a better place? Chase is working on veterans. Walmart is also hiring 100,000 veterans, and they are the single largest seller of organic food on earth. There are a lot of things that these companies do that are good for the world. Nobody is perfect. Not even Warby Parker and Tom's Shoes are perfect. But we all do have to try to leave the world a better place than when we found it, or else our brands will be punished as a result of that. So when we walk in, we say, what are you doing? And how can we help you talk about that? 90% of this generation, of the millennial generation, likes when a brand talks about what they do that's good for the world. They want to know. It doesn't all, we actually target a group of people called upstanders, who are people who really are passionate about causes out in the world. They buy junk food. They buy carbonated soda. They understand that you can't be perfect all the time. Even people who volunteer for the Peace Corps are not saints. When the lights go down and they're done digging wells, they're doing other stuff too. So if we try to be saints, it's gonna fall on deaf ears. But what we can do is while we're operating commercial capitalist businesses, also try to leave the world a better place. And that's how we thread the needle. We try to help companies understand what they do really, really well that's good for the world, and then talk about it.
And I think that information is not only as a consumer, but this generation even as employees, who to work for. I know
yeah, 80% of this generation would choose to make less money to work for a company whose values they agree with and whose causes they support.
So I'd like to open up to questions. One in front here.
Now I need my glasses.
Hi, Tarek Alvin with SAP. And
Hi.
I'm fortunate enough to work for a company that's very committed to CSR. We're just opening an SAP Tech High School here in New York, where we're going to train people to go right into the workforce with technology skills.
Awesome.
So we practice what we preach. I'm generously considered a millennial at 34, which I always
You're
find
right there, yeah.
sneaking in, which I always find very humorous because there's so much of that generation that I don't necessarily identify with per se, and I lead communications for our US market. Some feedback that we've received that I'd love your thoughts on is we get a lot of complaints that we're pandering and catering to millennials and that it's disenfranchising our employee base and isolating them from truly integrating into our corporate culture. The people we hear that from the most are millennials. How do we go about dealing with this major issue when our executives who are in their 50s are like early talent millennials, yes, and the millennials roll their eyes?
First of all, I'm on a mission to do away with the word millennial. It's Generation Y, and that's actually the technical term. Millennials is a much more recent term, and it sounds like marketing speak, so that's one way to do it. The second way to do it is to involve that generation. Mark Zuckerberg is Generation Y. The inventors of Snapchat are Generation Y. So some of the most successful business people on earth are from this generation. And for old middle-aged white guys like myself to imagine that that generation doesn't have something important to contribute in the executive suite is stupid. And so you really have to pull them into the conversation, and then, craziness, you have to listen. So for and by Generation Y is a real big key. Most of the shows that we make on our network are either produced, starring, written by, or executive produced by people from that generation. And so, you have to not be afraid to include them in the conversation. Our Tumblr page, which we're launching next week, is made by 2 millennial guys. A lot of the decisions that we make as far as greenlighting involves feedback directly from this generation. So you have probably everything you need in-house already. You just have to let them in the room when you're making these decisions, as opposed to just saying, well, here it is. Top down is over. Open source is now the way of the future. And we've made a television show based on that, which is Hit Record. So in my mind, you have the resources in your house. You just have to open the door and let them in, let them commingle. I scared everybody.
You said you had studios on college campuses. Are you looking for any more?
Yeah, no, we always are. If
Okay.
they're, we try to.
I work at Pace University. We have
great. Yeah.
downtown and in Westchester.
I know it well. Yeah.
Okay, good.
That'd be great.
All right.
You mentioned Hit Record, and and tying into your Hyundai program, collaboration is extremely important too. How do you approach that, and how is that going to change how communicators reach out to this audience?
Yeah, there's a difference between user-generated and open source. User-generated is cats jumping on trampolines and Mentos in Coke, and open source is Hit Record. Open source is actually one of the great innovations. Eli Lilly uses it. A number of big Fortune 500 companies use open source as a way to create product. And to me, that is you can still have a chief decision maker who happens to be a CEO or a CTO or CIO, while still incorporating the ideas of the collective. You know, this generation doesn't necessarily need to make the decision. They just want to be heard as those decisions are being made. So Hit Record is an open source television show, the first of its kind. We do a number of things like that. We have a content collective where we're generating. NBC made a lot of noise about this user-submitted comedy thing that they're doing this week. You know, that's not necessarily that new. Number of brands have been doing it for a number of years, but taking in ideas and not being afraid to hear them and say yes sometimes and no sometimes, that's collaboration. You know, chaos is the user-generated world of YouTube, and you can see the reason why they're moving away from user-generated into more professionally produced content is because professionally produced content, even if it is open source from Daily Grace or Hannah Hart or someone like that, is always going to be more valued than pure, you know, let's all put up the video of our little brother biting my finger.
Hi, I'm Bob Veritoni of Verizon. You mentioned before about commercials that go viral, advertisements, and you said, well, everybody knows they're advertisements. Are you really so sure?
Yeah.
Really? Because my wife teaches grade school students, and that's something.
Well, I mean, okay, so there's a difference between elementary school students and college-age students. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a very savvy media generation, and so I do believe. And what's happened is that those who have tried to sneak through by creating ads that don't seem like ads get bonked on the head, oftentimes by this generation themselves. You know, if you try to be really sneaky, yeah, you can get away with it. But for the most people of Generation Y understand the difference between an ad and content, and they don't necessarily care about the difference between the two. All they care about is that it's good. And so when you see a really good commercial, you'll share it. When you see a really good show, you'll share it. If the advertiser tries to sneak through by creating content that's really an ad, that doesn't look like an ad, okay, yes, you can get away with that, but you're only going to get away with it for so long. And frankly, this generation really does appreciate a very smart brand integration. You know, we did an integration back when I worked in IFC for Subaru inside Portlandia, and the reaction was, that's the perfect car for this show. They liked it. We did an integration for Geico and their talking pig and put, you know, the chicken named Colin. And again, people dug it because it was a smart way to connect that brand with that show. So, you know, yeah, you can be sneaky and get through with it every once in a while, but ultimately, a smart brand integration will work better than, you know, a dumb one.
Got time for one more question.
You got Trump, Josh.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. My question is, do you think that the Generation Y is a little more open to all kinds of advertising if it's done well? Because they didn't they're not like me where I saw the progression of more advertising and more advertising, you know, that sort of like, that saturation from advertising that was progressive, whereas they kind of like opened their eyes and it was already there. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, this generation grew up with it, and so it became more acceptable. What they don't like are ads that get in the way of enjoying other content. So, you know, nobody loves the idea of I'm watching Walking Dead and now I got to watch 6 minutes of commercials. Nobody really enjoys that experience. Let's all be honest. But they also are smart enough to understand that that's the way the world works. And the number one network for people between the ages of 18 and 34 on television is Adult Swim. And Adult Swim works really well, and it's all live. So this is not a time-shifted audience. And one of the major reasons for that is that most of the audience is stoned. But secondly, that the breaks are curated so that the experience is congruent with the content itself. Do you know what I mean? So when you go to a break on Adult Swim, it looks like the programming. That's okay, and that's what this audience will really, really enjoy. That's why the Super Bowl is the greatest piece of branded content in the history of mankind, because you're there in part to watch Certainly wasn't the game this year. So, and yet the audience never trailed off. It peaked at 115 million people. 115 million people during the Super Bowl, during the halftime show, which was ostensibly a commercial. So good content will always win, and context is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly important. If you put a commercial inside a piece of content that doesn't feel like the rest of the environment, you're going to get backlash. If you put a commercial inside that content that is congruous, that is in context, that's why when you go to a movie theater, some ads get booed, some ads get applauded. The ones that get applauded are good. They look good on the screen. They were shot for a screen. So, content in context, brand in context. That is the future. And by the way, it's also the past. Texaco Star Theater, Jack Benny doing commercials for Whirlpool. We are back to the beginning again. And that's why Howard Stern gets paid so much to do his ads, and Jimmy Fallon gets paid a fortune to do fingers on an F-150. Content in context.
Great, that's a great place to end. If you haven't checked out Pivot, I encourage you to do so. The programming is great, and I come from the very tail end of the baby boomer generation. I find it very compelling. And I want to thank you, Evan, for sharing both your new network and your insights.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.